Hey everybody, this is a fairly brief update to my thoughts on the beta for Tom Clancy's The Division, in which I talk about the changes that they made to the open beta compared to the closed beta that I already did a video on. I won't be retreading the same ground that I did in that, so I will provide a link via annotation on the screen right now so you can click on that and check out the original thoughts on the beta, because most of them haven't really changed. There were only two significant changes that the open beta brought. The first of them was that it added a new story mission, and the second one was that it messed around with the Dark Zone. Now, the new story mission is what you're seeing right now, and it's another story mission. Doesn't really add all that much to the plot. We still don't really know exactly what the plot is. And in this one, it has you going up against the Cleaners, who are the group of enemies that are all in gas masks with flamethrowers and such. And of course, at the end, you fight a boss who is basically a big guy with a flamethrower. And while he isn't that hard to beat, he can still be pretty annoying. But it doesn't really add all that much to the game. It does unlock the Tech Wing, which allows you to have access to the turret ability instead of just having access to the 3 starting abilities and then the additional healing ability that you can get from unlocking the medical wing through the mission that was in the closed beta. This time around you can get the turret, but apparently it's glitchy as hell when you get to the Dark Zone, and I didn't take it in there anyway. I used the medical thing like I always did. But the group I was with in the Dark Zone did tell me how it was for them, and it basically glitched out and started attacking things at random, and it just became a mess. So I don't really see that becoming all that useful unless you're going up against exclusively NPCs, which means basically playing the single player. Now, they did tweak that a bit as well, just in the nature of the drops that you can get. Now, in the closed beta, the drops were pretty crap. In the open beta, actually, they seem even worse. This time around, I didn't find an adequate substitute for the starting assault rifle until I was already level 8. And that's keeping in mind you start at level 4 and you get level 4 gear, so that's not a very good thing, and it basically forces you to go into the Dark Zone to get anything remotely acceptable in terms of loot. And even when you do get into the Dark Zone, while they did increase the rate of loot drops, the quality of those drops isn't really all that much better than the normal single-player stuff. So really you end up just having to save up all your Dark Zone credits in order to get all the really good gear from the Dark Zone vendors, which honestly defeats the point of having loot drops in the first place. And when you get down to it, the Dark Zone really isn't much better than it was in the closed beta. The main difference is that it actually has a form of anti-cheat enabled, so there's not quite as much cheating as there was during the closed beta, but you will still run into a cheater or two on occasion, and when that happens, it is very, very annoying. At least it's not anywhere near as ridiculously easy as it was to do that during the closed beta. But it is still a problem, and they're going to need to iron that out once the full version does roll around. The really big problems I saw with the closed beta are not so much in the content, though. The content was basically just a slightly more in-depth closed beta. But what I was really hoping they would improve actually did not improve. Namely, the performance. The game still runs like crap. And it's actually kind of amusing because earlier today, as I'm recording this video, I got an email from Nvidia saying that Ubisoft recommends a GTX 970 to play The Division at the best quality and everything, and I have a GTX 970, and the game gets about 35 to 55 FPS at 1080p. Occasionally it will jump up to 60 FPS, but normally it is sub 60, and this is what they recommend you run it on? I think it's much more likely that they really need to optimize the game a lot better, because let's face it, this thing just doesn't run all that well for the majority of people, and that's just plain unacceptable. The problem is that I don't know exactly how they would be able to do that in the time that they have before release. I mean, this thing comes out next month. And frankly, once all the content does drop when the full game releases next month, it's still going to be plagued by the vast majority of the problems that I mentioned in my original My Thoughts On video. Like I said, this is just an update to that, and it is basically the same exact thing with some very slight content improvements, and with the rate of decent loot in the single player and co-op being reduced to the point where it basically forces you to go into the Dark Zone to get anything remotely acceptable. And once you get into the Dark Zone, it's much the same as it was in the closed beta. There's still a lot of griefing, there's still a lot of chaos involved. They did increase the number of NPCs that you'll run into in the Dark Zone and thus be able to fight them for loot drops and such like that. But since they increase the amount of damage those guys do and the amount of damage they can take, it actually makes it more annoying than anything else, unless you have a full party anyway. If you go into the Dark Zone solo now, you're pretty much screwed. You could muddle through it in the closed beta, but in the open beta, not quite as much. You can still do it, but just be prepared to die an awful lot. But the handful of changes they made to the game certainly aren't enough to save it in the long run, and I'm still not gonna pick this thing up until it goes on a pretty significant discount. The core gameplay just isn't that engaging. But as I said before, I'm not going to reiterate what I said in my previous MTO, that would just be a complete waste. But the point is that from this beta, the Division is just a big disappointment. Maybe it'll get better when the full version comes out, but I'm really not looking forward to that very much anymore. Thanks for watching.